and welcome. I'm Lisa Marie Mishtak. We are in Egypt's capital, Cairo, for the inaugural Intra-Africa Trade Fair. It's the first of its kind on the continent. It's being hosted by the Egyptian government in collaboration with the African Export-Import Bank and the African Union. As well as the trade fair, conferences will be taking place with a key focus on the implementation and the ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The Intra-Africa Trade Fair 2018 ran from the 11th to the 17th of December. Over 7 days, the trade show provided a platform for sharing trade, investment and market information. The African Export-Import Bank organised the trade fair in collaboration with the African Union, and it was hosted by the Egyptian government. The IATF 2018 conference ran alongside the trade fair. 42 sessions with 152 speakers took to the stage. The workshops and conferences included people from the world of film, TV, musicians and business leaders sharing their ideas on how to transform trade on the continent. With over 1,000 exhibitors from across Africa, China and India, it was a prime meeting space to enable buyers, sellers, investors and countries to meet, discuss and conclude business deals. But how successful do some of the fair's exhibitors think the fair went?
We've been here for a couple of days, but not without challenges. We had challenges clearing our goods. Our goods didn't get to us until about 4 days into the exhibition. So time was wasted, because we didn't have things to showcase. But nonetheless, we attended the lectures, which were the conferences, which were also very educative. And the exposure, the number of people we have made, all added up and made up for the, lack of products in good time.
It's been very interesting so far. I've met people that understand my story and what I'm trying to do here.
So far it's been good. The main purpose of this fair, we have come to learn, has been to interact with other exhibitors to see if we can have some deals when it comes to distribution. And like I mentioned earlier, in Ghana, our collection, which is called the Gigi, it's a craze. Everywhere you pass, someone is wearing it. Now we are looking for distributors across Africa. So this has been great for us. We are talking to people in other spaces to see how we can work together.
IATF 2018's aim was to promote trade with African countries and support the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Discussions on the ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area were hosted by the African Union and Afrexim Bank. The African Continental Free Trade Area aims to remove 90% of trade barriers. 49 African countries have signed. 13 African countries have ratified the agreement. The African Union need 22 ratifications in total for them to move it forward. The inaugural Intra-Africa Trade Fair is the first of its kind on the continent. How important is a trade fair such as this?
Well, let me start by saying that when we conceptualize our Intra-African trade strategy, we hinged it on 3.5 pillars. One, we say to create, connect, deliver, and measure. Under the create pillar, what we wanted to do was to expand production capacity, right? Value addition, create productive capacity, because Africa must produce what it can sell to its neighbors. The other was to connect. We saw there was a disconnect between the buyers and sellers. In that space also, we realized that there was inadequate or lack of trade and market information. As I often say, the Kenyans don't know they can buy raw hide from Burundi. That information is not easily available, but they buy it from New Zealand. Nigerians don't realize they can buy pharmaceuticals, quality pharmacy from Egypt, but they buy it from everywhere else. So there was lack of adequate information on where to source materials, where to sell, what the rules of trade within Africa is among countries, who to partner with. And we saw a gap that we needed to bridge. So the connect pillar is essentially to connect buyers and sellers, and that's the pillar under which the trade fair falls in. There's a deliver pillar, which is to deliver efficient delivery and distribution capacities. And of course, there was the measure. The measure is an ancillary pillar because we actually want to measure our intervention, especially as it relates to informality of trade, to measure informal trade. So we thought that under the Connect pillar, and the trade fair is one of the initiatives that we are pursuing under the broad Intra-African trade strategy. But under the trade fair, there was an opportunity for us to connect buyers and sellers as a way to build trade information. And so that was important, so that Africans know that they can actually easily source goods, services, and even investments from the neighboring countries.
The African Continental Free Trade Area aims to remove 90% of trade barriers. 49 African countries have signed, 13 African countries have ratified the agreement. The African Union need 22 ratifications in total for them to move it forward.
The African Union got involved because we have what we call the Action Plan on Boosting Intra-African Trade, which was adopted by the heads of state and government in 2012. And it has a number of clusters. One of the clusters is on trade information. And the trade information comes in various forms. Trade fairs, and also coming up with the directories. We're going to set up a Pan-African Trade Observatory, which is going to be an online export and import directory. Now, with respect to trade fairs, when you bring buyers and sellers together, and the sellers come with goods to showcase, you facilitate business-to-business engagement, and out of that engagement, the parties may agree to go into deeper commercial relations. So as a result of this, we agreed that we work with the African Export-Import Bank to start this series, which will be done every 2 years. So this is the first one, and the second one is anticipated to be targeted to be held in 2020. And because of these are very serious trade events, we targeted the trade deals of about 25 billion. And already we have gone past that target. The trade deals are now about $27 billion. And we had targeted 1,000 exhibitors. When we opened, it was 1,086 above target. And so the trade fairs are a very important forum for exchange of information among buyers and sellers.
Where will the money come from to fund the African Continental Free Trade Area?
Let's go back to history. When we were fighting for independence, we were not born. We are the foremothers and the forefathers. They did not say, where are we going to get the money to fight for independence? If they had done that, we're not going to be independent. So when you have a vision, opportunities come up. And when the opportunities come up, you find very innovative ways of mobilizing resources. And by creating this large market, we're going to attract large-scale investments from both within Africa and outside Africa. Immediately we created this market, the African private sector linked up with us to say, can we have a more close working relationship? And we agreed. And out of that, we had the Intra-African Continental Free Trade Area Business Forum, which was held in Kigali, a day before the agreement was opened for signature. And they mobilized $1 million to assist us in the advocacy for faster ratification. And that is already working. And not too long ago, we were in Germany, and they told us that you have given us what we want. We want a large-scale market. And Volkswagen is now ready to invest in Africa. And if everything goes very well, what we want is a situation where we can be producing 1 million units in a given year. So when the opportunities are there, the money will come.
Optimism is running high with achieving the aim of getting the ratifications needed, but what are some of the challenges to its implementation?
Trading in Africa has always been trading in dollars or euro. And that, of course, creates two problems. One, the availability of the foreign exchange becomes a key constraint. Two, the possibility of countries devaluing or revaluing their currencies also creates some level of disconnect in the trading pattern. So I believe the discussions at this event in terms of how do you promote easier trade financing mechanisms so that we can either trade in our own country, in our own currencies, or find a common currency that is acceptable to Africa that we can now resort to. These are very important issues regarding trade and investment. There's also the issue of availability of financing even for investment itself. Fortunately, I think there seem to be, from the discussions we have seen, many avenues in which financing is being addressed. The Afro-Exim Bank, for instance, is doing a great deal to expand availability of investment funding and to create options for investors across the region. So this will be very helpful. Thirdly, there is the multilingual problem across the different regions and different language zones in the continent. This also does add some challenge. It's not an impossible thing to trade across languages, but I think it's again an area that this type of event, this type of interaction, brings people together and provides an opportunity for people to build confidence, to build partnerships that will subsequently help in trade.
Over $30 billion of trade deals were signed over the course of the week. Just how important was the inaugural trade fair for businesses on the continent?
It's very important. So we were here during this week. We saw a lot of opportunity with other countries, with other companies. It was really good. And it's work like as a platform, so that we can see what kind of things the country are doing in other parts. So we are neighborhood with Zambia. Sometimes we're importing something from Brazil, from Portugal, from China, but we have in Zambia all these things. In South Africa as well, we can find a lot of products they are very strong in agriculture. So we have to join, we have to work together with the other country. I think that this trade fair is very important. It was also important because we can understand that we have to work together so that we can change Africa, we can change our reality. And I think that it was very important for us.
We see the trade fair as a platform to do three things. First of all, to expose to the rest of Africa our investment activities, where we operate in our interests, but also to identify areas in Africa where there are opportunities for us to either invest or to trade. As you are aware, this is the first Intra-African trade fair, so it does provide, if you like, a one-stop shop where we can meet all potential African partners. So it is very important to us as we expand into other regions in Africa that we build relationships, we build partnerships, and we identify trajectories in terms of where we go next in Africa. We have found it very successful. We have had a chance to meet several other potential partners and investors. We have participated in the various discussions, especially with regards to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which the African Union is now driving very strongly. We believe that our participation in these discussions will be extremely valuable in ensuring that as our countries and our nations and our governments engage each other in building the necessary bridges across the different regions and different countries to facilitate intra-African trade, to grow intra-African trade, and hopefully through that to grow the African economy as a whole. That as key investors in this continent, as strong believers in the integration of Africa, we believe we have a major role to play. We do recognize, of course, that there are challenges to be addressed, and our participation will also give us the opportunity to highlight some of the challenges we see, and of course be able also to discuss with our peers in the continent, both in the private sector and with the various agencies of the various governments in Africa, particularly the AU administrators, to be able to discuss and make input so that when these trade agreements, when these content agreements are in place, all the issues that would need to be addressed from all perspectives are identified and taken into account.
One of the key components in the realisation of the African Continental Free Trade Area is the harmonization of trade standards to facilitate intra-Africa trade. The former president of Mauritius, Amina Garib Fakim, took part in a workshop to discuss what could be achieved, but how can set standards be established?
I think it's just beyond standards. I think when we look at, if you want to promote trade, we're talking about quality as being the baseline, issue that we're talking about. So when we look at trade, we look at exchanges, we look at commodities, we look at movement of goods, people, and services. We need to benchmark it somewhere, and the benchmark, as far as I'm concerned, is only one thing: it's quality. So yesterday was a very important day because we are raising the awareness that to promote intra-Africa trade in all these aspects we've been talking about, we really need to push for a quality culture. And yesterday was a great time to actually push this. And in fact, I have also been talking to other institutions and make them speak to each other. So I was very pleased last week when I was in South Africa to see the launch of the first standard for good financial grant practices. And this has happened because there has been a conversation between the African Academy of Sciences, where I used to sit in the governing council, with ASU, where I'm now the Goodwill Ambassador. For too long, Africa hasn't got we didn't get its acts together in as much as we haven't been speaking to our neighbors. If you look at the European Union, we see that nearly 49% of the trade happens intra-European countries. Here we have a population of 1.2 billion, and yet the cited figure for the formal trading hovers around 17%. So there is a huge internal market. And I think if you look at the future of Africa, because increasingly we're talking about an Africa which is getting younger, we need to create opportunities for the youth. And I think if we promote the trade, we promote the entire suite of possibilities to empower this youth with jobs, to become entrepreneur.
The creative industries component of IATF 2018 featured 6 workshops. Didier Drogba, Debange and Rita Dominic were a few of the famous faces tasked with being ambassadors for the trade fair.
I came here because looking at what has happened, the creative industry, especially for Africa, is one of the biggest employee of jobs right now. And it creates jobs without you wasting time on waiting on the government to show you the way. So it kind of just allows you to have visible hope. And for me, if we cannot put the right things in place now, we'll end up working so hard but selling our souls. Why do I say selling our souls? It's because all eyes on Africa now. In the last 3 years, especially in the music scene, in the movie scene, all eyes are on us. But because we don't have capacity building, we don't have the right mentors that would advise you well, when they come to you with a deal, you end up selling your soul without really knowing what's happening because you were never taught and you didn't even have any reference point. So what I came here to get from them is because I know that Afrexim Bank is, in support of IATF, and the main reason of this is to encourage trading within African countries. The biggest export in trend is creative industry, is talent. I will be glad to see that a South African artist is doing a song with a Nigerian artist, a Kenyan artist is doing a movie with a Nigerian artist, a Ghanaian artist, and together we can sell. We have close to 1 billion, if not more, in Africa alone. We really don't need the rest of the world to make a living. You release your song here, you release your movie here. If the right structures are put in place, you will make more money than even Black Panther in your continent.
With an estimated 140 million people of African descent living across the globe, Afreximbank and the African Union are keen to mobilise the diaspora to build relationships and better trade relations.
The diaspora has a huge role to play in telling our stories. We are all over the world. We interact with our host countries, we build relationships with our host country, we marry, we have children, we've become a part of that community. And when we do become a part of a community, we must share our stories. I think what we can do a better thing of is owning our stories, celebrating our stories, and sharing our stories with our friends, our co-workers, and getting them to say, I know this is what you see on the TV about Africa, but let me share my experience. And there's not one story to Africa, really. I come from upper middle class. So actually, when I moved to America is when I knew how poor Africa was. So America educated me about poverty in Africa, but I lived a different lifestyle. But for me, my work is now, how do I tell the world that there are complex business transactions happening in Africa, but because of mindsets, barriers, groups of people around the world are being excluded from those transactions because they are not passive in Africa. They don't understand the Africa of today and the Africa, they don't believe in the Africa of the future. So I think our work is cut out for us. We really have to have a clear view of the Africa we're working towards, and we have to say we want partners. We would lead, we have to lead. We cannot afford to say, we cannot hand over the steering wheel to other people. We cannot expect other people to build our nations. The greatest regions and developed places around the world that we've seen were built. A nation is built, and we want to call on all the diaspora to please join. What we do know is fragmentation doesn't allow you to negotiate in a powerful way, right? So by Africa coming together, and the interesting thing or the funny thing is people already perceive us as one country anyway. So why not? So I see unity in number, unity as a force, unity as a strong negotiating bloc on the global market, to say as a unit we can go to the market and say this is our value, these are our people, this is our market, this is our infrastructure, this is how we want to play on the global market. It's easier for us to have that conversation united than divided. So the Intra-Africa trade is a landmark event, it's history, and one of the things I say is everybody that is part of this inaugural event, they are the risk takers, because when you're trying to do something for the first time, it's really challenging to share your vision and to get people to support your vision. So I must commend President Oroma, the head of and chairman of the board of Afreximbank, for his vision, and I say this is the type of leadership that Africa so needs. This is the time that we need that type of leadership, and this is the first actualization of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's not just we want to do. Now we can really say that we do believe in it. We are putting money where our mouth is. We mean business. Africans have showed up and they've told the world we are moving. So for me, this is history, and I do hope that we tell that story, that it doesn't just end at this event, that we're able to tell the story of what we're doing here, and we can also tell the world of why they want to be a part of this movement to transform Africa.
I was looking for a way of promoting not only trade and investment, tourism, but also rebranding our Africa. So I conceptualized an event that's going to be cultural from beginning to end. And Miss African Union pageant was one of those ideas that came to me. So we crowned our first Miss African Union last Friday in Washington, D.C. at the great Grand Hyatt Hotel. I think the event was a resounding success. It was cultural from the beginning to end. The outfits were all African. The questions were all about the African history, starting with the Berlin Conference, the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, which France made all the 14 Francophone countries sign, the OAU, all the leaders who participated in the formation of OAU in Addis Ababa in 1963, the Casablanca Group, the Monrovia Group, what was the difference? Why did Africa lose when the nationalists won and the Pan-Africanists lost? All the way to the new AU, the African Continental Free Trade Area, protocols for the free movement of people, the African passport, and why the diaspora matter.
And who won?
We won. It was a resounding success. It was a 5-hour program. Nobody left because everybody was educated. The common comments were, Ambassador, we learned so much. A lot of the issues that our young people articulated, most people didn't even know. But what was even more interesting was having our youth telling our story, understanding our history from such a depth. That's where we really won. And then, of course, the music. We had the Zulu dancers of Southern Africa. We had the traditional Rwandese dancers. We flew in the ghetto kids from Uganda. We had the master drummer from Ghana. We were supposed to have the belly dancer from Egypt, but last minute she couldn't make it. But next time, we definitely are going to make sure every region is represented. And of course, I have the support of all the ambassadors in Washington, D.C. The next event is going to be even bigger, and they've assured me we will have somebody representing every African country. And that's how we tell our story. That's how we rebrand our Africa. That's how we promote trade and investment, and that's how we promote tourism.
The answer to the questions posed by Dr. Nkrumah is obvious. We must reverse engineer the colonial strategy of divide and rule. We must create an integrated market for our continent.
And that's a wrap. To the very first Intra-Africa Trade Fair, billions of dollars worth of deals are made, connections were made, and in 2 years' time, the next trade fair will be held in Rwanda's capital city, Kigali.